888-67-NORMAL.
One of the most disturbing elements of the Prohibition War is how it's made police the enemy of otherwise law-abiding cannabis consumers. Fortunately, one group of police officers knows the futility of prohibition and reaches out to educate the community and current law enforcement. Today, the Russ Belville Show visits with another speaker from Law Enforcement Against Prohibition with one clear message: cops say legalize drugs.
Welcome back, everybody. Half past the hour, and we're joined today by Patrick Heintz. He's a former corrections and drug abuse counselor in Massachusetts, and now a speaker with Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Russ. Thanks for having me.
You know, it's interesting that we have you on today when I had just gotten done reading a piece from The Nation that had a lot to do with this push to get people taking drug tests and entering rehabs. And as we know, marijuana is most likely to show up on those drug tests. I'm wondering, as someone who's worked in substance abuse counseling and on the corrections level, how much does putting marijuana smokers in counseling affect the other people who are there for, say, harder drugs?
I think it's apples and oranges. They're different things. I mean, there was also another poll that came out today that said for the first time the majority of Americans believe marijuana should no longer be an illegal drug. It should be taxed and regulated. And just like alcohol or tobacco, or people no longer think that marijuana is a gateway drug to substance abuse. So, it's just like alcohol. 9 out of 10 people who use alcohol never have a problem with it. And 10% of the people who use alcohol will become addicted or have trouble with it. Addiction and smoking marijuana are different fish.
I totally understand. Thank you for that. I didn't mean to, bring you a tough question right out of the gate, but I saw the substance abuse counselor thing, and it just was on my mind. I noticed from your bio you talk about this revolving door phenomenon with respect to people, going from drug use to prison, and there's not much rehabilitation going on there. How frustrating was that for you in your career?
Well, it's totally frustrating. I call the current American drug policy the whack-a-mole approach to problem solving as far as substance abusing is concerned. Now, first off, I think it's very important that people understand, especially me as a former substance abuse counselor, and LEAP as an organization, we are decidedly not pro-drug. We are very much anti-violence. And, of course, the prohibition of drugs just guarantees criminal activity and the violence that goes along with it. But the data about the war on drugs has been going on for 40 years, and nothing has changed, except the quality of the drugs have improved, the availability of the drugs have improved, and criminal enterprise is enriched every year to the tune of $355 billion a year. We're just funding crime with this insane prohibition. And it's like whack-a-mole. You know that game where a mole's head pops up and you hit it with a hammer, and then another mole's head pops up? Are you familiar with that game?
Oh, yeah.
And it's the whack-a-mole approach to substance abusing, and it just doesn't work. It's a waste of time and it's a waste of money. As a substance abuse counselor, my background is psychology, and I see substance abusing and addictive personality disorder as a mental health issue. And there's not one other mental health issue that we address through incarceration and punishment. And, the most addictive substance in America and the most dangerous drug in America is tobacco. We have taken a public health model to deal with tobacco addiction, and we've reduced tobacco consumption down from 75% of adults to 17% of adults without incarcerating anybody, just through education. And people, educating people that it's dangerous, and getting people to realize that it is not cool and it is not sophisticated, and we can do the same thing with other drugs. But you're going to have 1.3% of the population, according to the American Psychiatric Association, will suffer from addictive personality disorder. And they will abuse, mood-altering substances and narcotics to the point of self-destruction. And no matter what's around, if we got rid of everything, they'd be sniffing gasoline, because it's a mental health disorder. And so we have to address that as a health issue, not as a criminal issue.
Yes.
So but this whack-a-mole approach, where every 6 months I see a big story on TV where they've arrested 16 people, 23 people, and they've confiscated $500,000, and they've cut the head of the snake off. No, they haven't. They've just whacked the mole in the head, and the next mole pops up. Because every time you arrest a drug dealer, the person a little further down the food chain sees this as an advancement opportunity to now become the boss. Because working with inmates, their favorite movie, of course, is Scarface with Al Pacino, and they all want to be the next Tony Montana.
Right.
Have champagne by the solid gold swimming pool and all this stuff.
Well, Patrick, I was wondering one thing. I had done an interview a while back where I talked to a woman whose daughter had been raided at their home, and she fought tooth and nail to prevent her daughter from having to attend rehab, because in her words, she said she didn't want my daughter, who was a pot smoker, to, form, have emotional bonds with people who were addicted to harder drugs and attached to that lifestyle. I've also interviewed other people from LEAP who mention kind of, if there's a gateway with drugs, it's that it gets you into the criminal justice system, and then you're in criminal university, so to speak. You come out a better criminal. How is your experience reflected on that idea? Do you see the war on drugs and this, pipeline to prison as just a way of manufacturing criminals?
Well, I think it certainly increases the likelihood of someone coming out of prison with more antisocial orientation. When you take nonviolent offenders and people who are arrested for simple possession, and you put them into a prison population where you have truly criminal people, where it's a predatory environment and might makes right, and especially with the drug laws and the mandatory minimum. So if somebody is caught with, say I go downtown and I am a pot smoker and I buy, $10 bags of pot, because that's how the guy I'm getting it from is selling it. And now I have $10 bags in my pocket and I get arrested. They're going to charge me with possession with intent to distribute because it's bagged up for distribution. And, of course, if I'm in the inner city, I'm probably within 1,000 feet of a schoolyard. So I'm going to have 3 years, and it's a mandatory minimum. So I have to stay in jail. Now, we're social beings, and what that means is that we're driven to be included in whatever society we find ourselves in. So what happens is this antisocial criminal mentality becomes normalized in people who aren't, before they were introduced to this environment, naturally inclined to be antisocial or criminal. It's people just become absorbed into it. So I guess you could call it a criminal college. But 25% of the prison's population is there just for simple possession.
Wow.
Which
I wanted to look at another aspect of this with you, having worked in the corrections industry. We know how bad this war on drugs has affected the inmate population, but to what extent has it infected the corrections officers in the form of lobbying to keep their jobs, or even the corruption of being bribed to let drugs in and do favors, and how that all works?
Well, the enormous amount of money that's available to criminal enterprise as a result of our failing to take responsibility for the taxation, regulation, distribution of the substance that's obviously wanted by people in our society, puts law enforcement under enormous pressure. But it's also frustrating. You know, you get into law enforcement because you want to protect and serve, and it's frustrating that you try and do your job well, but nothing changes, and people keep coming back. But worse than that is this horrible overcrowding of the prisons as a result of this. If you look at the statistics, our prison population has increased by, 200, 300%, depending on what year you want to start at. And just by the way, the United States is 1/5 of the world's population. We house 25% of the world's inmates. So we are the most incarcerating civilization in the history of the planet. But what that does is that puts corrections officers at terrible risk, because when I first got into corrections, the staffing ratio would be one officer to, say, 35 inmates. Now you have situations where you have one officer supervising 90 inmates. It's unsafe for the officers. It's unsafe for the inmates. So as far as regulating drugs in America, taking the regulation and the distribution out of the hands of criminals, it's not a threat to law enforcement, and it's not a threat to corrections officers, because we would just have more manageable population numbers and staffing ratios. So I don't think that it serves law enforcement in any way, these mass incarcerations. It's not about job security. And then police forces are spending so much time, chasing drug charges, that the conviction of other truly violent crimes has gone down, the conviction rate. So law enforcement could be freed up to protect people from violent people, rather than sitting around surveilling people for 6 months so that they can whack-a-mole.
Yeah, it's such a waste, and we're so glad we've got people like you with LEAP that are fighting for this. Patrick Heintz, former corrections and drug abuse counselor in Massachusetts with Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Find him at leap.cc. Patrick, thank you.
Thanks, Russ. Keep up the good work.
I'll do my best.
Support these advertisers, because their ad money goes straight to the Russ Belville Show. You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
When we come back, time for a radical rant. We're going to take a look deep into that Pew Research poll.
It's simply business. It's simply business, why they won't let us grow. It's simply business.